This is Pop Culture Yearbook. On this show, we pick pieces of pop culture that were important to us in a given year. We then discuss memories and dig into those movies, albums, shows, and more. Hey, I'm Brad.
I'm Pete.
And I'm Giff.
And we're kicking off 1985 tonight. We did a preview last week, but I think tonight's the night we actually do what, Pete?
This is a real thing. This is where, we opened the yearbook.
Yeah, you caught on there.
I didn't catch your cue there. We're opening the yearbook for what year are we talking about tonight, Gifford?
1985.
Wow.
Yeah. And we talked about our memories of the year last week, so we're just going to go right for it here. I'm going to go for it, honey.
Let's go.
Wild animal.
Yeah. All right, so tonight, this is coming out here on November 8th. We watched 4 shows from NBC's Thursday Night Lineup in 1985 that appeared on November 7th of 1985. So we're going to stick around the old water cooler here today and talk about all those great shows that aired last night.
Well Excellent. Done.
So I picked this
all night. Did you stay up all night writing that one?
No, I didn't even write that down. I just brought that up now, man.
Wow, top of the head.
Going in improv.
Getting really good at this podcasting thing. So I picked this one, and I mentioned last week how I was getting into, pop culture overall at this time, but nothing more so than watching TV. TV was one of my first loves. And during 1985, 4 of the greatest shows, I think, in history aired back to back on NBC Thursday night. And they kind of got some of that magic back in the 90s, but I don't think they ever had 4 shows in a row quite like this.
This is like the 1927 Yankees of television.
That's right.
Murderers Row.
So it was The Cosby Show, which was in its 2nd season and was number 1 in the ratings. It was a juggernaut right off the bat.
Do I have to read our disclaimer?
Please, Pete, go ahead.
Pop Culture Yearbook does not condone or endorse the actions or behaviors of its subjects. Anyway, go on.
Yes, thank you. Then following that at 7:30 Central Time, because we were in Minnesota, it was Family Ties, which was in its 4th season and wasn't a giant hit before this, but had now rocketed up to number 2 in the ratings with that comfy slot right after the Cosbys.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to 8 o'clock and things get a little bit more adult. And you had Cheers, which famously, do you know where Cheers finished in the ratings in its 1st season, everybody?
It was terrible. It was like 63 or something. Yeah.
Its first episode was 77th out of 77.
Yeah, but no, I think at the end of the year, though, the entire season was dead last.
Right, but I found a little thing that the very first episode was also dead last.
Okay, and that makes sense.
Seinfeld was the same thing, actually.
But Cheers was allowed to grow, unlike many shows today.
Yeah.
And by this time, it was getting bigger and better. And then once this night hit, it was taken off, and it was number 5 in the ratings. So 3 of the top 5 shows. And then at 8:30, you had a little show called Night Court, which was in its 3rd season. And this show was number 11 in the ratings. So just about 4 in the top 10. Just missed it by 1 slot there. So if that's not enough reason to talk about these 4 shows and the historical great impact they had, I don't know what there is. So I feel confident in my choice that it was a good one.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was really fun, not just to watch these shows randomly, but like to pick a night and actually watch the 4 shows that aired that night and just treat it like a regular Thursday and see what it was like back then.
That's my only regret. I wish I would have waited until tomorrow night to watch these episodes, just to do it on a Thursday. But then I would be really unprepared for this podcast episode.
Yeah, that would be kind of backwards.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to run through each show one at a time. We're going to talk about what happened in it, what we liked or didn't like, and we're going to finish each off with a little rating out of 10. And then we'll kind of wrap up overall our thoughts on the year as a whole in television back then. Now, one other thing we should mention, and this came up in a previous episode, what's going to make this particularly intriguing tonight is that if you followed along here, you know that Mr. Gifford did not have NBC.
That's correct.
That elusive network channel that you just could not get on those farms out there.
That's right.
And so, Gifford, which two shows did you see for the first time in your life doing this?
Family Ties and Night Court.
Which that is just so
That's
shocking
amazing
to me.
Right. Well, and I'd seen Cheers in syndication because that would come on after the evening news on, I think, it was either CBS or ABC.
It was
Well, it was on
ABC.
NBC.
It was on, well, the
But it's
syndication was on ABC. Later, like in high school,
Yep.
I remember
No.
it being on ABC.
Well, it must have been on
After-
both. You're right. Okay.
10:30.
Yeah.
But it was on NBC because the big deal was Cheers was so popular in Minneapolis in syndication at 10:30 that it ran after the news, and they delayed the Tonight Show because Cheers people had to watch Cheers first, and they played the Tonight Show afterwards. Which
They'd play it twice on NBC?
No.
No,
They
the
would watch-
syndication. Like
Oh,
they,
well, you said
syndicated shows-
Tonight shows on NBC.
but people were so obsessed
Right.
with watching Cheers in syndication in this
Sure.
state, in this city, that they actually
And-
put it on and delayed the Tonight Show until after that and played it at 11:05.
Oh, I see what
And
you're
we're
saying.
talking about Jay Leno here, right? The Jay Leno.
No, I
no, this
think
would be-
I think both, even Johnny Carson.
It'd be Carson when it started.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Carson left in 92.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Wow. I
Yeah.
could see it for Jay Leno, but not for Johnny. That's ridiculous to think that they would have pushed back Johnny Carson. He was a legend. We're going to do an episode on late show stuff sometime.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be your choice, I'm sure, because you're a resident kind of expert. All right, so shall we get into it?
Yeah.
All
Kick
right,
us
so
off.
it's November 7th, 1985, and it is 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we are turning on The Cosby Show. This is Season 2, Episode 7, and the title of this episode is Rudy Suits Up. So in this episode, Rudy is playing football, and Cliff is all over that, and he loves it, and he thinks she's the greatest football player ever.
Mhm.
And Claire is not very much into it, but during the episode, she goes to her game, sees Rudy have a great game, and all of a sudden, she's number one fan, and they kind of go back and forth, and that's mostly what it's about. Of course, all the other kids have a role too, but this one was more Rudy-centered than many of the other ones. And I'm just going to say, Rudy was about the cutest thing ever back then. At that age, she was just a doll. So
Mhm.
Yeah,
was
she
really
was
good.
fantastic.
and I also
great
love
actress
this
for somebody
episode
that age.
contained one of my favorite characters, her friend Peter, and
Yep.
Peter was on this one too. You could
I've
never
got
go
that
wrong
written
with
down.
Right. And he was her blocking back, not her lineman, but her blocking back in this episode. Oh.
So,
well, and
alright.
I thought this actually, for me, having kids in youth sports was a fun one to watch.
interesting.
Claire definitely reminds me of my wife.
Oh, I can
The
see
way that she's, yelling and screaming in the crowd. So I got a pretty good kick out of that. So
Mhm.
I enjoyed how it was mostly Rudy, but the other kids all were so supportive of her. The whole family was just so sweet. And they all cheered so much for her. Even Denise, who, Denise was not always, she always had a lot of problems on the show. But she was a great big sister for her, too. So it was a very sweet
They were all very
episode.
supportive. That was one of the things that made the show great. How well they kind of played off of each other and just supported each other in different ways in different episodes. Sometimes it was about Theo. Sometimes it was about Vanessa. This was about Rudy. This was great.
But they also would have very tough love, too, and come down very hard on their kids,
Well,
which
as
made
did-
for a lot of the comedy. But then still,
As did Cliff, of course.
yeah, well, Cliff, but even the mom, too. Do you remember there was an episode where they like put Theo and Cockroach on trial, and the parents, like, so Cliff and Claire were involved, and they set up this big trial because they were accused of something at school. I mean, it's just fantastic how they did that kind of stuff.
oddly enough, I don't remember that episode.
Oh yeah, you would. Well, speaking of Giff, how many? So you've seen the Cosby Show? Like, how
Yeah.
much? Like, what have you seen?
I've just seen it, in syndication, flipping through the channels. You've seen, an episode here or there. The other night when I watched this one, my wife remembered an episode that she really enjoyed, which was when Theo got an earring.
Oh, yeah.
So I watched that one. She remembered the physical comedy of when Cliff came into Theo's room.
And they lay back on the bed.
They'd lay back and he'd look over, Theo trying to keep his ear concealed from his dad.
That was great. I know exactly what you're talking about.
So, but yeah, I guess I don't remember exactly the episodes that I've seen, but just in passing, I guess I
have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you know who Sandra is?
Sandra, hold on. I had something here. Yes, she's the oldest daughter.
Yeah, okay.
And she was an afterthought in the series.
Yeah, that's the thing. Especially the first couple of seasons.
Yep.
I had to look up on IMDb. She was only in I think 2 or 3 episodes the whole first season. I don't even know why they decided they needed another kid, because it felt like she wasn't even going to be on the show at first.
I have an answer for you.
Oh, you do? Of course you do.
The reason they wanted, there's a couple reasons. One, the 5 kids are representative of Bill Cosby's real family. He has 5 kids with a middle son, 4 daughters and a middle son.
God, you are just the glue of this thing here.
But the other reason they added her,
holding the gears together,
was because they wanted to show the results of a well-raised child in that family.
Oh, because she was already in college.
She's in college, so they wanted to show that this is how you end up when you are raised in this household.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I've known this show for 36 years, and now you have taught me something new. There you go. That was fantastic.
See, when you're scared out of your mind about to do a podcast on a subject you don't have any knowledge about, you kind of dig up a few nuggets.
That's why you're the MVP, though.
You come prepared, yep.
But I do, because she did become a much more major character in future seasons. When Elvin comes in, do you know who Elvin is, Gifford?
No.
So Elvin became her boyfriend, and he's like this misogynistic, not like a tough guy, but just he totally believes that women are in the kitchen and women have roles, and he fights with Claire constantly, and it's great. And him and when he comes in, him and Sandra become major characters and have a ton of big episodes.
Okay,
but she was definitely a slow burn and introduced slowly. And in this episode, it's kind of like, what is she even doing there? You just don't even know.
Is he the actor that made a few years ago became viral because he's working at a checkout, a grocery store or something? The actor that played Alvin.
If that's the case, I am not familiar with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember. It was he's just doing a job, and it was everybody expected he'd have millions and millions of dollars, but that's what he was doing for his job to get by.
Hold on a second. There's an out-of-work actor somewhere in this world?
Right, I guess.
One of the things I found interesting about this episode that was a little different was that there were these outdoor football scenes, because there's not a lot of
I noticed that
outdoor on-set recording on this show.
Right.
And it was kind of weird to see that. It was great because you got to see what they kept referring to with Rudy, but it was definitely something that you don't see often on this show.
The part that
most of the stuff's just in the living room in the house.
Yeah, I mean, there's scenes at the hospital, but yeah, most of it takes place in their awesome, wonderful home that they live in.
Comedically, the part that stood out to me, and you see a bit that's like this in almost every episode, that's very similar, but it's just hilarious, is when Cliff is sitting down to watch football.
Oh, I was gonna say this, I'm sure.
That whole scene, the way it was done, it was just hilarious. How Claire comes in and she's like, "Hey, what you watching?" And he's like, "The football game," and it was the Bears versus the Giants or whatever.
Yeah, that was it.
Goes, what position or who's playing Rudy's position?
Yep.
And it was Walter Payton. Yeah. Oh, he only gained 9 yards. Rudy's much better than he is.
And the looks he gives
the way that's and he always does that, and it's great. And the way that was done, what kind of stood out to me was that they just let it simmer like any sitcom that's out today, they would have to explain Walter Payton's the greatest running back of all time. They would have to throw some kind of a line in there to explain who he is.
Mhm.
And but
true.
there was none of that, and it was just like he was able to let the joke just sit there, and it's just that kind of dead stare that he has, and while everyone's just laughing.
Well, it got even better because then Denise joined on
And
the
Denise,
couch, and then her
Right.
and Claire are talking back and forth, and they think they're all of a sudden experts on football, and he's just.
Like
I think he got up and left. didn't
He got up and left.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. That blue really clashes with the red or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, and one of my favorite parts of the whole thing was when Cliff started recounting his football memories and his greatness, and Claire just comes right back at him with all the things that was wrong with his performances.
Right.
When she says, "Wait a minute, so you're not good at night or during the day?" It was just, I love the back and forth between those two. It really was a great scene there.
Yeah, I
They
think that
played
was,
off
that was
each
my
other
favorite
really
part
well,
of the
those two.
episode was
Yes.
the football scene on the couch there. That, and I always loved Theo, and he unfortunately didn't have a lot in this episode. But early on, he's talking about his math class, and he's complaining about his math teacher. And he said, "I had to go up to the board," and she just kept
Yes.
going on. And then Cliff said, "Well, how long were you up there?" And he goes, "I was up there the whole period." And the way Theo delivered that was just perfect, of course. And him and Cliff back and forth are great. So.
Oh, it seems like you have performance anxiety. And it's like, or you just don't know what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it's performance. Yeah. Yeah. That's like the mom who says, "Oh, he's just a bad test taker." No, he just doesn't know the subject matter.
The
Yeah.
brutal honesty is that was probably one of the funniest parts of the show. Is he would always just have that brutal honesty,
Mhm.
and it was great.
Well, in the very first episode, that's one of the greatest scenes, and that Pete, you probably would remember this. Theo's talking about how he doesn't want to go to college, and he wants to just live a normal life, and he's not going to be a doctor or a lawyer. And he gives this big speech about it, and it's all this heartfelt stuff, and then the audience claps, and then there's a pause, and Cliff goes, "Son," and you think he's gonna hug him, and he goes, "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard in my whole life." And he just starts ripping on him, and it's so funny. And that's the essence of the show right there. That's just
Right.
what made
Brutal
it so
honesty.
great.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And why it's so sad that we had to put a disclaimer on this, because Bill Cosby was an incredible comedic genius, and oh well.
Yeah.
I got a couple of fun facts for you about this
right.
show. If you'd like to hear them.
Hit it.
Who was I didn't write it down and I can't remember. What's the name of Rudy's best friend, the chubby kid on
Peter.
the football team?
Peter.
Peter.
Yep.
The actor, the child actor, he actually had really bad stage fright.
Mhm.
And instead of trying to correct it or anything, they just played off it because it made the character that much more perfect, because that's why he was so shy and everything. And they're like, we can make this funny.
Well, that's hilarious, because he would never talk, and he would run off the set a lot of times, and he would get all scared of Cliff, and
Right.
And I didn't. I mean, he played it great, and
Well,
that's what
it was
made
real.
Peter so hilarious. But that's so funny that's real life.
Yeah.
So I got go ahead, Pete, if you got some more.
Sure, I got a couple more here. In the original pitch for the show, they were not into, because obviously the couple is a doctor. They're a doctor and a lawyer. That was not the original intent. Do you know what the professions were in the original pitch for the show?
Wasn't Cliff supposed to be like a bus driver?
Close. A
Taxi
limo driver.
Oh,
A limo driver. Okay.
Yes. And Claire was supposed to be a what?
She's supposed to be Spanish speaking.
That was one of the pitches too. She was supposed to be Dominican, and but it was her, Felicia Rashad's stare, the death stare that she could give, that got her the role. I did read that too, but her occupation was to be a plumber, a union plumber.
Wow.
Okay. I did not find
And it
that
would have been a totally different show then.
And so why did they? I mean, I just would have assumed they always wanted it to be the way it was with these successful family.
That was why they kind of changed their mind, is that they wanted it to be like a black family living in an environment that you don't normally see on TV, a black family in.
Right. An affluent family.
That's why I just figured that was the pitch from the get-go. That's really surprising.
Right. Who was the original actor that they wanted to play Rudy? And I say actor because it was a male.
It was a boy. Yep. Yeah. None of the male actors.
Cuba Gooding Jr.
No. It's another well-known sitcom child actor.
Webster.
Steve Urkel.
That's right. The kid who played Steve Urkel was the original.
Jaleel White.
Yes.
Jaleel White. Right.
I was going to say Corey Feldman, but I don't know if he would have fit in.
Feldman. He was too busy shaving his head.
Right.
Gifford, did you have another fun fact?
Yes, I had a few here. One of the two finalists to play Sandra was none other than Whitney Houston.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Is that right?
Came down to the actress that played Sandra and Whitney Houston. Cosby was never nominated for any Emmys at his request. He didn't believe in competition amongst performers.
Artists.
He didn't want to be nominated. ABC actually rejected the show. Can you imagine? Upsa Daisy. That was a little bit of a bad move there. That's pretty much all I had. The only other comment I had on this particular one was Rudy was great, wonderful athlete, but let's be honest, the players on that other team, they were awful. They were bad.
The way they're diving for those tackles.
Yes, it wasn't quite it
wasn't Varsity Blues like.
Right.
It got the point across.
Needed that announcer from Not Another Teen Movie to come on there.
What the F just happened?
That's the quickest half of football I've ever seen.
So I asked you guys to rate each show out of 10 on however you wanted to rate the scale. I was rating them like how I would compare them to other shows of the series, the way I remember the series. Of course, Gifford couldn't do that, so that's why you could do whatever rating you wanted. So what did you give it, Pete, out of 10 for this particular episode?
Comparing that episode of Cosby Show against itself, Cosby Show as a whole, I thought this was about a 6.
Okay.
Actually, and that sounds low. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, but it's just that I remember a lot more funnier episodes of the Cosby Show than this particular one. So there you go.
And Giff?
Again, I wasn't rating it against itself. I was rating it just in general. I gave it a 7. And the reason for that is that the humor in it doesn't pull any punches. And just the overall heart of the show, the way the family, you saw that a lot in family sitcoms where it was all about, the family, but it seemed like it was a little bit more with kid gloves. This one, they don't pull the punches on this show. So I rated it a little higher than maybe some others.
I also gave it a 7, which to me is pretty low for a Cosby Show episode in the first few seasons but there's so many episodes that I just love and so many episodes that I would go 9 or 10 out of 10. And this one, it was fine, and I like Rudy, but having an episode that centers around her is not what I want to watch. I want to watch Theo or something with the older kids. I don't even remember Vanessa in this. I mean, she was in it, but I mean, talk about not having anything to do. So I thought it was definitely just a run-of-the-mill, not a great episode, but still entertaining. Still had some really funny parts in it. So that's what I.
You and I are kind of in agreement there. Then.
Yeah, you gave it a 6, but what you said was pretty much the same thing I was thinking. So.
Right.
All right.
Move on.
So now we go to Family Ties. It's 7:30 Central Standard Time. Family Ties is in season 4. This is episode 6, and this is called The Old College Try. And this episode is about basically Mallory, the oldest daughter. And I think she's a junior in high school, probably. I don't know if they actually said or not. But she is looking at colleges, or at least her mom is looking at colleges. They're getting mail from colleges. And Elise is way involved and way excited about it. And throughout the episode, we find out that Mallory doesn't even want to go to college, which, if you watch the show, is not a surprise at all. And Elise should be aware of that. But it creates friction between those two. And that's what it's all about, is how do they reconcile that? And the other characters come in. So will she or won't she go to college is basically the theme of this episode.
Two of the colleges she was looking at were Rutgers and Ohio State, both Big Ten schools today.
Which, so the first thing I said is, it shouldn't be surprising that she doesn't want to go to college, because if you watch the show, Mallory's a terrible student. She always was. And Elise would know that.
Every sitcom has a dumb character, and she was a dumb character.
And then not only are they looking at colleges, but those are pretty darn good big-time colleges they're looking at. It's like maybe lower your standards a little bit. So anyway, that was the first thing. The other first thing I noticed is I know that Dave, in particular from our podcast, loves Justine Bateman. And she was a very cute girl in the 80s, but man, did I not like her haircut.
Oh, it was brutal.
Not a fan of the
That was one of the things. One of the few things I wrote down is her and Nick's hair is just unbelievable.
Yeah, well, Nick's fits, though. Nick's is great for him.
Right. It's just a huge rat's nest, though. Holy cow.
And I love
Justine
Nick.
Justine Bateman and I are birthday buddies, by the way.
That's right. I knew there's something there, too.
Us and Smokey Robinson also. Anyway, I digress.
So two side characters that are in this episode that I adored. I love Nick, and Nick was new here because when we did our Lost episode of 1985, that was the original Nick episode, and when she first brought him home, and that was just like 2 or 3 weeks before this. So he's a brand new character, but I love him. And then Skippy, who has a very small part.
I had forgotten about Skippy.
But I had forgotten too, because it's been so long since I've watched it, and I wish he had a little bit more time here, but Skippy's great. And he had episodes where he was wonderful too. So it's nice to see all of those people represented.
Yeah.
The episode that you talked about that we had watched before, where it's Nick's first or second episode, and he's sitting at the dinner table, and it's that was one of the funniest scenes that I can remember from Family Ties, when they first meet him, and obviously the dad, Michael, what's his name?
Michael Gross, Stephen Keaton.
Stephen Keaton, yes. Who, by the way, I think he's a fantastic actor.
He's great.
Perfect as the dad in this show. The whole series, I thought he probably was my favorite character.
Yeah, it's funny because as a kid, I remember not liking the parents that much as a kid. But when I watch it now, I'm like, they were just fantastic. I mean, they were both great. He is like even better than Michael J. Fox in a lot of things, I think. He's so good.
You see it from a different perspective now that you're a parent yourself, Brad.
But it's more just the acting is just I see it very differently. So
yeah.
But yeah, and that episode was called Mr. Wrong, if anybody wants to go back and find where Nick came into the fold and see that scene that you just mentioned.
All right.
What I loved in this episode about Nick is that, so at the end, Mallory goes to him to complain about her mom and basically to get his support, because Nick's a deadbeat. I mean, at least that's the way they describe him. Nick's a starving artist. He has no education. He doesn't do anything. And so that's a big conflict too, because the parents can't stand that. And so you expect him to really support her, but he actually tells her to go to college and gives a speech that you would never see coming.
Right.
And kind of changes it all. And the episode ends where you don't really know what she's going to do, because she's got all this advice from different people, and his is not what you expected. So Nick is one of those characters who you see, he's very much one-dimensional most of the time, but then you get to see these other sides.
And you kind of grow to love him.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought it was weird too.
They eventually accept Nick, and even though there's a lot of humor there.
Did he carry through the whole series? Like, did they wind up together at the end of the series?
Well, I know there was an episode where they either eloped or were going to elope. So I think so. I think they got married, but right. I don't remember.
I think I remember that too.
It could have been that they were going to elope and then maybe it didn't happen. And so I don't remember for sure.
So I didn't know anything obviously about this show, but Nick, to me, obviously you tell he's not, highly motivated to do much. So for him to be the voice of reason to get through to Mallory was kind of a odd twist that you didn't see coming. One thing I didn't understand is, why is there a piano in his apartment? Is he a musician as well?
I think he does play the piano. I think he does play the piano in some episodes. I think he maybe even sings a little bit. I
thought that was a little.
I'm
weird.
guessing. I'm trying to remember, but I feel like now that you bring it up, that was true.
Okay. I think it's there to accentuate he's a very artistic mind.
Yeah. He is an artist.
So that's probably he is. Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that.
So he makes art out of garbage.
Other than his little sculpture
that's his
at
whole
the end,
thing.
Which I didn't understand what was going on there either.
Well, if you met him 3 weeks earlier, you'd understand his garbage art.
I need the backstory. I need the Nick backstory. That's what I needed.
So the thing that's interesting about this episode, we haven't even really brought up Michael J. Fox, and he's the star. But he did not have a very big role in this episode, which is really disappointing because he's great. Everybody loved him, and this is like prime Michael J. Fox time right here. But he did not have many lines or many scenes in this episode. It was much more focused on Mallory most of the time. So
I think it got more, as the show went on, it became more and more about Alex, and more centered around it.
Yeah, for sure. Because this is right before, well, actually, this is right after Back to the Future came out. So he's really taken off, though. I mean, This is, and Teen Wolf.
Yep.
Do you remember? It was almost like the Who Shot JR saga. It was, he had this girlfriend named Ellen.
Yep.
And like that was a big cliffhanger, wasn't it? Or it was like Sam and Diane, like will they or won't they?
Because he was in love
break up
she,
or something.
She left him, or I do remember that at the end of one of these seasons. Because she became, his girlfriend was a big part of it after this.
Right. And Courtney Cox also played a girlfriend.
That's true. She was.
Ties. Yep.
And then of course there's Tina Yothers, who nobody cares about.
Adds very little value.
Oh, and they had a baby too. I always forget that because he's hardly in it. Eventually he grows up and he's in it a little bit, but like there is a fourth kid too that's like, who even knows who that is?
Well, he was mentioned during this episode.
Yeah, he was.
I don't even think that we saw the kid in this episode.
He's a baby still at this time, I think, and they mentioned hanging out or putting in a bed upstairs and
gave him a cup of coffee or something. And
Yep. All right. So, who was the original person offered the job? It's also a famous actor, but who was offered the job of Alex P. Keaton before
Eric
Michael J.
Stoltz.
Fox? No, that was Back to the Future.
Yes, I know. I'm glad you both got that right.
Very good.
What'd you say, Jeff?
Matthew Broderick.
Oh, that makes sense.
He did not want it because at the time he would have had to move out to L.A. He was not interested in moving out to L.A., so he turned it down. So there you go.
Interesting.
They seem very similar, those two.
He would have been good for the role. A lot of times, you hear about that. It's like, God, I could never picture that guy in that role. It doesn't
like
make
Eric
sense,
Stoltz,
but he would make sense. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So
yeah, I agree with you, Pete. I think he would have been very good in that role. One of the things I found is that the Nick character was slated for a spin-off.
Oh.
And all I could think about when I read that was the
Tortellis.
What was the one from Matt LeBlanc's spinoff from Married with Children?
Oh, Joey.
From Married with Children.
Wasn't you were saying that I was like,
I don't remember the name of the show, but how that show went, because Matt LeBlanc played Kelly Bundy's boyfriend,
right,
in several episodes, and so they made a spin-off show, and it was he and his single dad. I mean, it was just those two. Like,
right.
I think they were New York. They were living in New York, or maybe the Bundys were in Chicago. So I can't remember if the show actually took place in New York or Chicago, but basically that's what the show was.
Sure.
I remember watching it. I thought it was funny, but it only lasted for one season, if that.
Sure. One of the other things I found was that the ratings declined after season 5 when they moved it out of the Thursday night lineup behind the Cosby Show.
Why did they put it on
Yeah, they
Sunday,
moved it
didn't they?
to
Put it on
Sunday
Sundays.
night.
Yep. So
Why
that was
would they have
definitely
done
a
that?
coveted spot there behind the Cosby Show.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe they thought it could stand on its own with
Well,
Michael
yeah,
J.
that's what
Fox
they did with
doing.
all these. Because Night Court moved around all over the place after these four shows, according to my research, were on these 2 years in a row, and then
Okay.
they started moving. I think Family Ties right away, and maybe Night Court that same year. I'm not sure, but
But is that when Seinfeld came into play?
no.
Because what
No.
what would have replaced Family Ties in the Thursday night lineup at that time? Because what year was it?
Well, it'd have been like 87.
This was season
Okay.
4.
Seinfeld was 89.
Yeah, it would have been
First
around
came out.
87.
Okay. I thought it was a little bit after that when Family Ties ended. I remember the final episode, and it was a big deal, and they did the whole curtain call scene, and it was very emotional. Everybody cried.
The show that you guys were referring to with Matt LeBlanc, I believe, was called Top of the Heap.
I think that's
don't
right.
remember that
His
being
name
the
was
show.
Vinny
I don't-
Verducci.
Yep.
1991.
That sounds right. I thought you said that in our one of our previous
Oh
episodes.
yeah, that's the same name he played on Married with Children. So
Yep.
that's it.
Okay. Huh.
Interesting.
The other, just a very small thing I loved about this show too, I loved the house, and I loved how there were 2 doors into the kitchen. I loved how they could go around like a circle and come in from both sides in the kitchen. It's just one of those things that I liked. Apparently you guys don't care about that.
I don't care.
They
I'm
put
not big on
that-
their
that-
Well, I love houses that have like 2
a
stairways
good little
too.
point.
It's unique. I love that stuff.
That
You know,
played
I
into
noticed-
the
Whatever,
comedy
you guys
too.
suck.
A lot of times they'd be having one person who come in one door and
Yep.
and leave,
Yes.
and they'd be leaving out
And
the
at
other
the end
door.
of
It
this,
played
at
into
the end
it.
of this episode, there was a scene where like Alex and Jennifer came in through the back door one, and so that's how I noticed it again. And like, I don't know, I thought that
The
was
parents
cool. It
came
was a
in
cool
through the
house.
back door. Well, and Alex was saying divide and conquer. He gave
Yes.
that whole divide and conquer speech. He didn't realize because they came in the other door, but his parents were standing right behind him
See,
when he's plotting to divide and conquer the parents.
that was like the funniest part Alex had in the whole episode, is because he was
Right.
doing that and he didn't know they were there, and then he had to like try to cover it up.
The one line I did like was when he was talking to Mallory about how she's going to tell the mom about her not going to college, and he said something about just go there for a year and don't tell her, and you'll be none the smarter.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty good line.
Did you have any more fun facts, either of you fun fact guys?
The only other one I had was that originally when Michael J. Fox was approached about doing Back to the Future, the studio wouldn't let him do it. And then because of the delays with Stoltz and having to reshoot, they came back a year later and they allowed him to. So he was actually working both shows at the same time. It wasn't
He
during
had
the
a
summer
crazy
hiatus.
schedule back
Right.
and forth. Because then, of course, he went on to make a whole bunch of movies. And the amazing thing is that he was on this show all the way through 1989. And you would have thought he would have had to leave or would have left before that. And he sucked it up and stuck to it.
That's that network money. That's sitcom money, man.
Yep.
You keep coming back.
He was able to put out The Secret of My Success and Family Ties.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Teen Wolf and Back to
All
the
the Back
Future.
to the that's 3 Back
Well,
to
all
the
the Back to
Future
the
movies.
Futures, of course, yeah. All right, so what did you rate this one, GIF?
I put it at a 4.
Wow.
It was just
Ooh.
very formulaic.
Ouch.
You have, here's your disagreement or conflict, and we're just gonna kind of work our way through it. I just didn't see, and again, it's hard for me to say because I don't know all the intricacies between all the characters that you grow to love and know. So this was my one-off viewing,
I
so
get
that's
it.
kind of where I
But
had
that
it.
is still some harsh criticism. A 4, not even a 5. Wow.
Sorry.
Pete,
I had also this one as a 6, maybe 6.5 on this one. For a lot of the same reasons we talked about the Cosby Show. I'm comparing it against itself.
Yep.
I've seen much funnier episodes of Family Ties. Mallory is not my favorite character, and that's who this one's centered around. So yeah, that's what my score was.
Pete, you and me we're on the money, although our scales are just one level off, I guess. I gave it a 7 again, and I didn't laugh that much. Steven and Alex, neither one had nearly enough in this episode because they are usually so funny. And like the one we watched a year ago when we were doing the original version, I think I gave it a 10 out of 10, either a 9 or a 10. I loved that episode. I thought it was hilarious. So a 7 is actually, I mean, I don't go much lower than a 7 on a thing like this, but I didn't like it that much. I mean, it was just very average. I'm not a big fan of Mallory, and I definitely wasn't a big fan of Elise. Was annoying in this episode. She wasn't as funny as she can be.
Yeah, I got kind of annoyed,
but it was still like, ugh, it was when they did that interview and she wouldn't shut up. I was like,
that's exactly
wow.
what I was going to say. That was over the top when that whole college interview scene, which you didn't see very often in that show. I thought most of the time they were really on point. That one was just over the top.
I totally agree. I think we're pretty close to Gifford actually on our scores there.
You're a little bit nicer than I am, Brett. You're 1 point nicer than I am, and
I've always been considered nicer than you, Pete. That's the general
we're both.
I was actually going to jump in there and say, "What now, Brad's the nicer one?"
You're what now?
Yeah.
I was definitely being sarcastic. Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Brad's
I know.
I know who I am.
Oh.
All right, now it's 8:00. Things get to be a little bit more adult. Some of the kids are going to bed. We move from the family show to the bar, which is still a big family, though.
Yes.
And this is Cheers. This is season 4, episode 6. It's called I'll Gladly Pay You Tuesday. And the main premise of this episode is that Diane borrows $500 from Sam to buy a original print copy of Was the Sun Also Rises by Hemingway, or
I think that's right. Yep.
Yeah,
that sounds right.
And he's trying to make a point to somebody, and so he gives her the money and acts like he doesn't even care if she pays him back. And then, it's a sitcom. Eventually, he holds onto the book, but he ends up ruining it while actually trying to read it.
Right.
And then she never pays him back, and it's of course it's the whole back and forth between them and a money thing, and at the end, I think, because she wanted to sell it.
Yep.
What did happen at the very end?
He buys it.
Oh,
They get in the bidding war.
The other
But
guy.
he has no money, and he doesn't think she's going to actually expect him to pay for it.
Right.
But she does. Yeah, that's all right. So
But he has to buy it because he can't let her see it in the condition that it's now in.
Correct.
Yeah. So.
Right.
All right. Cheers always has an opening scene, and this one was where they were trying to set some sort of Guinness bathroom stuffing record.
Yeah.
I did not find that funny. I thought for an opening scene, that was really kind of lame for Cheers. I don't know about you guys. But...
Yeah. It was a little over the top, but I thought it was funny. I mean, that's kind of how they all are, those little opening clips.
Yeah.
I didn't mind it.
All right. I mean, I didn't hate it. I just didn't really find it. I thought it was kind of flat.
Okay.
Yeah. I can see that.
Woody, by the way, if you were not aware, had just started Cheers this season. So this is his 6th episode. So he's brand new. And if you couldn't tell, then, well, now you know. But he had some great lines right off the bat. My favorite line of this whole episode. So Sam, I forget what story he's telling, but he says, "Picture this."
Yes.
I think it was a dream. Was he naked or something?
Right.
No, he was getting into the tub to read the book.
Yeah. And Woody goes, "Hang on. I'm still trying to get one of your socks off."
Right. And Carla says something along the lines that she's pictured him naked at this point.
Like she's fantasizing about it.
But Woody delivered that line like a champ, and he fit right in from the get-go, and I love that.
He did, but I really miss Coach.
Yeah, and Coach was great.
I love Coach.
So I watched the whole series last year, and I was always a bigger fan of Woody because when I started watching it at my age, Woody was already on.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't watch the Coach ones as much. They weren't as funny to me. Coach was a great, great character. But I feel like the show got so much better, and then Woody was great. So I definitely prefer those mid seasons overall. But yes, Coach was he had some really, really amazing lines and was a great guy. So
between those two characters, I prefer Coach, but that's not a knock on Woody at all. I mean, Woody was
right. I prefer Woody, but I
replacement.
totally get Coach was great, and he had a great storyline, being having the history with Sam and everything. So it was great.
Yes.
Carla is known for her zingers, and she said something to Diane right off the bat. But I also love it when Diane comes back, because Diane, she's so prim and straight-laced and everything. But by this time, she's really integrated into the bar, and she gave Carla a really good one back. And I love it when she does that, because she thinks she's so proud, and they're really funny because, again, you don't see those coming as much, and it puts Carla in her place, which does not happen very often.
Right.
So
Diane is
not my favorite character, but when she does funny stuff like that, then I love that stuff. So
do you remember the line?
Sometimes I can be annoyed by Carla.
Sorry,
Carla?
what? Did you remember the line she shot back at Carla?
No, I hope you do.
Well, she told Carla, she said, "I love what you're doing to your hair now. I think you should keep washing it."
Oh yeah. That was really funny. And Carla she's speechless. She has nothing to say because it's that good.
Well, what I like
the show, there's so many of those zingers, especially with Carla, but with Cliff and back and forth, and there's so many great lines, so much great writing in that show, and those are some of the better examples.
Well, and what I love about this episode is that Sam's fine loaning Diane the money. He has no problem with it. But Carla just keeps digging and digging. Like, oh, she's got a new sweater. Yeah. Oh, she's got new shoes. Oh, she's got, you don't even want to know what she spent the money on. Just won't let it go. And you can just see it building in Sam's head and him just getting so frustrated until he finally just explodes.
Carla's an instigator.
He is.
What I like about Cheers is, compared to other sitcoms, I mean, a lot of great sitcoms that we've talked about, Cheers makes you as the viewer feel more integrated into the show than probably any other sitcom, in that you feel like you're a patron at the bar just sitting and watching all this going on, in my opinion. Different, which is, I don't know how to explain it, but it's different than a lot of other sitcoms, which are just like, for the most part at this time, it was all family sitcoms. And that's what's different about Cheers and Night Court. I think they were, the first ones that kind of broke that mold in as far as 80s sitcoms.
The accessibility of that, you could just walk into any bar and that's what you're going to see. It's not they play up the Boston angle quite a bit, but it could be a bar in Dallas. It could be a bar in, anywhere, any town, USA, so it's not so much, you could place yourself in there, and
it's more likely to be a small town bar though, because like a small town bar, then everybody does know who you are, for better or for worse. And so that had that kind of feel to it. Usually you go to a bar in downtown Boston, it's going to be all different people there. You don't know anybody. So
speaking of that, like coming into the bar, I mean, that actually fits right in, because Coach dies and Woody just seamlessly fits right in. And then Diane leaves to become a movie star, stupidly, and Rebecca fits right in. Like, the show never skipped a beat. It went through some pretty major character changes that could have killed it, or that could have, but in my opinion, both times got better after those. Maybe not all the way to the end, but I loved Rebecca, and that was, to me, like, the high point was her first couple seasons, where everybody was just on fire at that time and at the height of their game.
Right.
Because Diane was great. But, I think Diane had a shelf life. She left after 5 years, and that's probably better for everybody, because her character just will grate on you at some point.
Yeah.
So,
I've got a really good fun fact about Cheers.
Oh, let's hear it.
Can you tell me what Norm Peterson's father's name is?
No.
Obscure. It's mentioned in one episode, but if you look on the internet, you can find that his father's name was Mervyn Peterson.
Oh,
No
you've told me
way.
that before.
Yes.
I've heard
Which
that.
which for the listeners, that's my dad's name.
Yes.
So he's your
So-
brother.
Right.
Norm's
I
your
guess
brother.
Norm. Yeah, I guess so.
Did you know Norm is not his first name, but his middle name?
It is Hillary or something like
Yep,
that.
Hillary
And
is
that's
his first
he was
name.
named after his grandfather. That I knew too. I read that today as well.
Awesome. I have
You
a
guys know
wonderful.
so much useless information. It's just wonderful.
It's like we're Cliff.
Yeah, see, it's like two clips right there.
All right, here's my favorite fun fact that I found, and it's only because I started watching the series the other night again. Do you know who has the very first line in this entire series?
I do, or God, I don't remember. I mean,
Well,
I
it's
don't-
not one. It's not one of the main characters. It's the old Kansas corn shucker, the baloney bopper himself, Cousin Dale
oh,
from Vacation.
yes, he's in that, right? What?
He's a kid who comes into the bar at the very
Yep.
first scene, and he
Really?
tries to buy a beer. And Sam, of
I
course,
totally remember that scene now because I
turns
just
him
watched
away.
it last year. But
Yeah.
did you ever bop your baloney?
yeah, Cousin Dale
On that-
tried
On
to
that
get
note,
one.
the entire series opens up with Sam walking out of the pool room, and it closes in the very last episode. It's a shot of him walking back into the pool room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's a great ending.
it is.
Yes, it was.
So, are we ready to rate this one?
Well, I got one more fun fact that I wanted to add in here, talking about Cliff. So Ratzenberger, he auditioned for the role of Norm, and obviously didn't get it. But at the audition, he asked if there was a bar know-it-all, and improvised Cliff on the spot. So they wrote that character into the show.
I feel like I've
Wow.
heard that before too. That's and my God, talk about an all-time great sitcom character.
Way to seize the moment. One more fun fact.
Yeah.
Frasier is not in this episode, but who was originally cast to play Frasier Crane?
Oh, I didn't see this one. Oh,
Eric Stoltz.
It's another
Eric Stoltz.
Eric Stoltz. It's a very famous actor.
Oh, yes, I did see it. Harry and the Hendersons.
John Lithgow.
Yes.
John Lithgow is correct. Yes.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense.
I could see that too. Yeah.
All
As
right.
far
Any
as
other fun
rating,
facts?
No, that's really all I got.
The
All right.
only other thing I wanted to touch on was I've always felt this was one of the all-time great intro songs to any show.
Oh, it's my
Oh,
favorite
absolutely.
for sure.
And in 2011, it was deemed by Rolling Stone to be the best theme song of all time.
There's a lot of great ones, but I would find it hard for anybody to argue against this one. It's so amazing.
I would like to see that list. That sounds like it'd be an interesting list. That we
Speaking
should,
of that, though, the Family Ties theme song is also fantastic. And when you first
right up
hear
there.
it, it just it feels great when you hear that song come on. Because you don't hear it as much, but it takes you back right away.
right, you can sing along to it too, just like.
All right,
Right.
well, I'll go first this time. I'm going to go with my third straight 7 out of 10.
I
much as I
also
love
had a
Ch-
7.
As much as I love
Sorry.
Cheers, I wrote hardly anything down. I found this to be a very unmemorable episode. It was way too much Diane. You notice we haven't even hardly mentioned Cliff, Norm, or hardly anybody else because
Not even Sam hardly.
have very little to do in this episode. And I don't know. I did not love it at all. So I'm going with my 7 out of 10. Kind of a blah night so far.
I kept
Based on
waiting
what I
for.
remember of the shows, which had so many great episodes, and these just don't fit that category to me.
In all of these episodes, I kept waiting for that laugh out loud moment because these shows had plenty of them, all three of them, but I just didn't. same thing. It didn't hit me in that same way. I didn't have that just burst out in tears laughing moment.
I think for me, this did have one that was close. When Woody said, "I'm trying to get one of your socks off," I thought that one did hit it, but that's the only one that stood out.
That was good, but I also gave it a 7.
Okay, Giff, Cheers. So where are you at?
I gave this one an 8. I did enjoy watching this one. Again, just and again, maybe I gave it a higher rating than the rest because I know it the best out of the ones we're covering tonight. But all the little relationships between all the characters, you just fall right back into it. So to me, I just liked it. So I definitely liked it the best of the 4. So I rated it the highest of those.
The best of the 4. You're kind of giving it away. Okay.
Wow.
All right. Well, speaking of the 4th one, we are now at 8:30, and we've got Night Court. And this is season 3, episode 6, and the title of this episode is Best of Friends. And when I was looking at these episodes to pick the night, I really, this one stood out to me just by looking at the description because it seemed way ahead of its time, and I was wondering how they were going to handle this.
Yeah.
So in this episode, John Larroquette, I'm blanking. What's his name on the show?
Dan Fielding. John
Larroquette, who is the ultimate ladies' man, Mr. Macho type man, has one of his best friends from his childhood from college, I guess, coming back to visit, who he hasn't seen in a long time, but who was also much a ladies' man at the time too. But his friend comes back, and his friend's name was
Chip.
Okay, thank you. And now his friend's name is Charlene, and has undergone a sex change operation and is a woman.
The full operation.
Of course, shocks everybody on the show, but especially John Larroquette. And so the whole episode is about how he deals with that. And you can imagine it's 1985. There might have been some uncomfortable or awkward jokes or things made that we wouldn't maybe hear today, but we'll get into that right now and see how they did with it. I actually thought this is my favorite episode of the night. I'll just give that away right now.
Okay.
By far, actually. So I thought the opening scene was amazing not amazing, but it was a great opening scene when Charlene comes in and the reaction they all had was great. And it just set it up right off the bat. They didn't waste any time. And then it goes to the credits, and Night Court has its own kind of jazzy theme song, which is also fun to listen to. But while that's playing, I'm intrigued. Like, okay, I really don't know where this is going because it could be pretty bad, I think. But as I said, I think they did okay. So what about you guys? What did you know?
I actually, speaking, before we get into the episode itself, or before I do, but the theme song, because you mentioned it, I remember thinking at the time that it seemed to me that the Seinfeld theme song almost played off of the Night Court theme song.
I've never thought that.
You just had that little bass riff, and that's basically what it was. And
they're similar,
sort of like a pared down version of it, right? So yeah, it just kind of, and that struck me again as I watched the episode this time. As far as the episode goes itself, yeah, I was kind of shocked. I didn't know. I mean, you had planned it. I didn't know what the episode was about as we went into it. You're right. There were some definitely uncomfortable moments. I think that all of those uncomfortable moments, though, they were written to fit Dan's character perfectly.
Right.
And that, like you said, he was a womanizer and would be, the kind of guy, the macho guy that would be against this kind of thing and everything. And then it just sort of evolves, and then he sort of warms up to it towards the end, and it has kind of an emotional ending because he starts to accept what's going on. And then the whole side story was that Bull just didn't get it. That was the whole comedy. He had no understanding of what was going on at all, which was common. Bull was the dumb guy. Like I said, every sitcom has the dumb guy and that was Bull, and I thought he was just great in that role.
And I thought that was really funny, and Bull was funny, but the way they tried to explain it to Bull sometimes, some of those were some of the more awkward moments that I don't think it just didn't come off quite the way you'd see it today, I think.
Right, but if you're trying to explain it
in
any possible way you can, you're going to come at it from all kinds of different angles to try to get it through his thick skull.
they're explaining it to Bull like he's a child, like he's a 5-year-old kid, and I mean, but that was his character, and it was that was well done.
So you compared the song to Seinfeld. I also, the show as it was starting gave me the feel of this is like a workplace comedy. I think maybe Taxi was maybe like the original that this kind of followed in that form. But it made me think a lot like this is kind of like an original Office or Parks and Rec, or Park and Rec if you're Pete.
Oh my God.
It gave me that feel that, it's a workplace comedy, tons of characters, tons of funny side characters. And I think this kind of was one of those shows that helped set the stage for those later on. So I like comparing it to those.
Night Court had episodes where it could get into a really deep emotional topic like this one did. And I think that it actually, the other episode in the Lost episode of our podcast that we watched, it was about, what's
Marky
name?
Post's
Marky
dad,
Post.
I think.
Her dad wound up.
I didn't care for that one. I don't remember it, but
that was kind of emotional too. And I remember that being kind of a little bit more in depth. But that show, when it wanted to be, it could be emotional, or it could just be like joke after joke after joke.
You think of it as just the word I would use is zany. It's just a zany comedy.
Yep.
That's what Harry Anderson is. That's what The Judge is. But you're right. It could work in these other kind of more complicated topics, which you certainly wouldn't expect. That's why I was excited to watch this when I saw the description of it.
Right.
Besides Bull, Mo is great, and I don't remember the old lady's name, but she's great too. And then she's replaced eventually by Roz. This is a show where, like Cheers and the other ones, where they're side characters, but I thought in this episode the other characters had enough of a role that they all had like a purpose, and they all had something funny to give, which unfortunately that Cheers episode didn't really have for a lot of the best characters.
There was the old lady, and there was also actually a lady before that.
Yeah, she died too, right?
So there was two. Yeah,
they both
called
died,
it the curse of the bailiff, and then
That's
Roz,
right.
and then they just decided they're going to get somebody younger to play that role.
Exactly.
Thankfully, she didn't die.
Right.
So
outside of the gender sex jokes, I thought two other jokes stood out. I'm sure you guys noticed. There was a Walter Mondale joke and a new Coke joke, which the crowd just went crazy for. The new Coke joke.
Well, because it came out in '85.
I know these were so right of their time, but even now watching it, you could totally know. I get that because the way the audience reacted, you knew. Okay, new Coke was new and hated, and they nailed it.
Yeah.
A couple of fun facts about this. Michael Richards actually he had a role on Night Court. It was just one of those people that they keep bringing in,
right?
And then they're on trial, $50 in time served. I remember this episode and character. I didn't remember it being Michael Richards, but he played a character that was naked, and the reason he was naked is because he thought he was invisible. And so that's why he just thought nobody could see him. And so he was walking around town and everything, and he got arrested. And that was his defense, is because he thought that it was invisible.
That's another thing this show did. There was a lot of like naked people and references to people being naked, or like flashers, or I think in that Lost episode, there was like a bunch of naked women in his chambers or something that you don't see them obviously, but like that was like our kind of a running theme was naked people.
Well, this episode had a guy who was he kept exposing himself. He was
right. Yeah. So see, there's always a naked guy on this show.
Well, and one of the fun facts I found was the creator of the show named a lot of the hookers and pimps after friends of his as a way to basically say hi to them on the show.
That's good. Also, there was at the end of the show, in the last episode, there was no big send-off or anything like that. And the reason for it is because there was the possibility that it would get sold to another network, and that was still kind of pending, but that never happened. And so that's why the show just kind of cuts off.
Oh.
And John Larroquette has said that he felt kind of cheated by that, because he would have, all of the actors would have wanted like that Family Ties moment where you get that curtain call or some kind of a big emotional.
Well, And it
Send
deserved
off.
it because you don't think of this show probably as much as the other three, but this show was
Right.
on until 1992, I think, and it had nearly 200 episodes. I mean, this show, it wouldn't die, and it got moved
Mhm.
around, and the ratings stayed pretty decent no matter when it was. I mean, it's really impressive when you think, and so it deserved to have a better ending than that.
Well, and
Yeah.
like Lara Cat, Lara Cat won Best Supporting Emmy,
Yeah.
85 to 88,
Yeah, he won a
and then
bunch.
asked to not be nominated again.
Oh, is
Yeah.
that
He
why?
could
Yeah.
have, right.
Wow,
Yeah.
because I
Well,
saw
I
that.
mean-
I thought he
Read that
won
too.
more, but that explains it then.
It was he has won more, but he won 4 for Night Court. But I mean that shows that it was getting critical acclaim.
Yeah, he was
You know,
always. He
from
was a
from the
huge.
get go.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we can get to the kind of the follow up with all the jokes and stuff, but this also reminded me. And Gifford, you're watching Cheers. I don't remember if you've gotten there yet, but there's an early episode of Cheers in like one of the first couple seasons, so probably even before this,
Yeah.
where a former baseball player that Sam knows comes back to the bar, and he's gay, and you would not expect that to come up in the early '80s on a show like this, and everybody there was a lot of pretty tasteless jokes, but the show at the end, I mean, it treated it well. Everybody in the bar like came to grips with it. It had a good ending. I mean, so you're going to get those '80s jokes, but they were very inclusive in these episodes of these things that you probably wouldn't expect because it's so long ago.
You speak of Cheers, and so I started rewatching it. The second episode of Cheers, an old patron comes into the bar looking for the former owner because that's the guy who always fixes problems. Well, coach is like, you tell me what your problem is. The guy said, my son came home from college with his black fiance who's a man.
Oh yeah.
And that was the second episode of Cheers. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't the main point of it, but basically it came to pass that the guy just needs to accept his son for who he is, otherwise he'll lose his son. And I was like, this is 1982.
And I'm like, I'm so impressed that they handled those topics, but at the same time, it's really depressing to think of how little progress, I mean, we've made. It's almost 40 years later, and you still can't get some of that stuff on TV, or people can't handle it, or
right.
It's just, it's crazy. So
right. Well, and I think
because
the end of this
everybody's got a
episode, we're going to cover critical race theory, aren't we?
oh, big time.
Oh boy.
I am
get
a
into
teacher,
that. Right.
I do everything wrong.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know what else you guys got, but I just want to like I said, some of the jokes were a little tasteless, a little uncomfortable, but it was interesting to see it addressed, and I really thought overall they did it really well done. And I liked at the end it, you kind of expected it to work out. You don't think they're going to go but I could have seen this ending a different way with John Larroquette's character being what he was. And so for him to come to grips and everything and have the happy ending, it was really cool, and it was kind of fascinating to watch. It's like a time capsule.
The one creepy line that I found was right at the end when he pulls the fiance over and just goes, "Be gentle." I'm like, what?
Yeah, there was. Well, and I also thought it.
Like, what does that even mean?
The other
How would
thing
you
that
say
I
that?
was really surprised by was when Dan was out in the hall, and Harry comes out, and Dan's like just mad. I just can't believe it. I can't accept it. I can't believe what she did. And Harry says, "I agree with you," and starts ripping into her. And it sounded to me like he was going another direction, like he was gonna sarcastic, get over it. But that never happened. He was actually on Dan's side. And then it had to get resolved a different way after that, which surprised me because it didn't make Harry sound like quite as nice of a guy as you thought he was either. You thought he could roll with the flow a little better.
See, I took that as
connecting with him.
Yeah, I took that as him trying to hear him, I'm just going to let him vent. I'll agree with him, and then he can vent, and he'll work his way.
And I got all that. I thought it was heading towards him, coming back and saying,
"Oh, sure,"
doing all that, but then saying, "But you know what? I mean, you also got to grow up," or I was just surprised how that went, but it all worked out in the end. So,
sure,
bravo.
All right.
Fun facts? Any more fun facts?
No, I got no more. Gifford?
Well, one thing I found strange was Bull's full name is Aristotle Nostradamus Shannon, and it claims that he has an IQ of 181, but yet he couldn't wrap his head around this subject. I thought that was
I don't think there's ever a time where you really think he has that high of an IQ. That's surprising.
right. So I don't know why.
How did you find that? Like,
that was
because
just on IMDb.
I feel like that was like brought up in an episode where that was like some sort of comedic thing where he took some sort of IQ test and like did ridiculously well. It was like one episode.
Oh,
so that's probably where they got it from.
And I read that over and over again, going, that's the character they're talking about, not the actor. Because I was like, oh, maybe the actor has an IQ of 181, but no, they said Bull, so that's the character. So I was a bit confused by that.
So how would you rate Night Court on this episode?
Well, I went with a 5 just because I just don't know the show. I thought it was awesome that they tackled the subject that they did. Obviously, I have to take into account that it's 85, so some of the jokes aren't going to age well, but that's kind of where I was at. To me, I wish I knew the characters more, and it just seemed like it was kind of all over the place a little bit. So that
show is all over the place. So
right.
That's the point of it.
Yeah.
All right, so, Pete.
I actually gave it an 8. Because not because of the comedic value in it, because there have been funnier episodes of Night Court, and normally it is, but because of the topic that it handled, and I thought it was well written and it was well done. Usually that's how that show works, is what it lacks in comedy in certain episodes, it makes up for in the rest of the story. So I thought it was good.
Well, I bet if you gave it an 8, you can guess what I gave it, Pete.
I bet you gave it a 9.
I did. I thought it was the best episode of the night by far, because of the interesting content, but I also thought it was pretty funny. I mean, I remember some pretty funny parts. The character, like I said, what I liked about it the best is the characters all had a role in the episode. And it didn't feel like they had to like force in a scene just to get somebody their little part. It felt natural, and they had their parts. So I thought it was really well done, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, one thing, just to wrap this up, when I was watching these shows, I'd ask my wife, Courtney, if she wanted to come watch the shows, because she, of course, watched these growing up. So when I got to Night Court, I was like, do you want to come watch and see if you remember anything? And she always said that her mom and dad didn't let her watch it. When it would come on, they'd say, Night Court, and she'd have to go to bed.
Oh, my God.
That's pretty funny.
But I'm...
All right.
True story.
We should wrap it up there on a high note, but we got one last thing to do here. So we're going to talk about our favorite shows of the year, which Gifford will not have any of these because he did not have NBC.
I did not.
So what shows do you remember watching in 1985?
Nor does he remember 1985.
And what was your top 5 or so shows of the time? How about you go first, Giff?
All right. So I did have 2 stations, and they did show television shows, and I was watching them. So, of course, as we've said in the past, Dukes of Hazzard was wrapping up this year. The last episode aired on February 8th.
Oh, so really early in the year. Wow.
Really early in the year. But that was always such a mainstay in the earlier years. A couple that I don't have on my top 5, Magnum P.I., Newhart, Love Boat, Alice. But
Alice,
my top 5, at number 5, I have Mr. Belvedere. Number 4, MacGyver. Number 3, Airwolf. I love
MacGyver was already on it this time?
Yep. I think MacGyver, and then also my number 2, Growing Pains, premiered this year.
Yeah, Growing Pains started.
Yep. So number 2 for me was Growing Pains, and my number 1, Who's the Boss, because of my very first celebrity crush, Alyssa Milano, had me glued to the television for a half an hour every week.
There you go. Pete?
All right. Well, my honorable mentions start off with Who's the Boss. similar reasons, Gifford. But my celebrity crush was Hot Mona, right?
Of course it was. Yep, you and the redheads.
I was a big fan of the show Moonlighting. Do you remember that show? Bruce
Yep.
Willis,
Oh, yeah.
Sybil Shepherd.
Mhm.
My dad, I remember, for whatever reason, he absolutely hated that show, and he hated Bruce Willis. He hated anything that Bruce Willis was ever in.
It seems really
So-
odd that you would have watched that at 9 years old, especially if your dad hated it.
Right.
Well, I remember watching it, and I just enjoyed it. I thought it had the actor that played Booger in Revenge of the Nerds, and he was also in Better Off Dead.
Yes,
Right?
Gifford, he's in
And
Better
I
Off
will
Dead. He's
find out.
the main
I
character.
will find that out.
He was in Moonlighting. I also had Growing Pains, and that's my honorable mention. And then my top 5 were Night Court, Newhart, Golden Girls, Cosby Show, and Cheers.
All right. So yeah, you kind of brought up this was a time when like a lot of shows were ending. Like either they were ending this year or soon. Like Alice, the Dukes of Hazzard. I think the Jeffersons were still on maybe for this
Yes,
year.
they were.
The Love Boat. Like a whole generation of shows is kind of phasing out, and then like Who's the Boss, Mr. Belvedere, Growing Pains, the Golden Girls too, were all just kicking off at this time. So it was a real kind of interesting transition. And I've watched all those shows at different times. One show that I want to just throw out as an honorable mention that isn't a sitcom that was big at the time that you guys might have. Well, actually, Gifford, you probably didn't. I think it was on NBC. TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes.
Oh, I remember that.
That was a fun show.
Dick Clark.
Dick
and Ed
Clark,
McMahon.
Okay.
So they would pull practical jokes on celebrities, but then they just show bloopers of shows, and that's all it was. It was kind of like Punked, but much more tame. Kate and Allie was starting at around that time. I love that show.
Oh yeah.
So those are a lot of my honorable mentions. My top 5, I had I did put Alice there because it was ending, but I was a huge fan of Alice. I loved watching that show with my parents. Number 4, I had Mr. Belvedere because when that first came out, I don't know, I really connected with that show.
Bob
pretty-
Uecker is just the best.
I loved Newhart. We watched that as a family most every week. And at this time, I was watching The Family Ties and The Cosby Show pretty much every week. I didn't have Cheers and Night Court yet because I really started watching them like a year later when I was a little bit older. So those 5 are ones that I know I watched then and enjoyed pretty much every week back then.
Well done.
And I love TV.
Hey Gifford.
Yeah.
Hey Gifford. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're talking about one of my favorite movies that I've ever seen, and that is Better Off Dead.
Actually, we were going to do The Breakfast Club next week.
Are we?
guys. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, we're doing Breakfast Club next week. Sorry, I misinterpreted. I thought Pete was throwing it to because it was my choice.
I think he was because
I had nobody else to throw it to.
shared
No, I
documents.
mean, I was going to throw it to Gifford because I thought you could stick the landing, but I guess not.
I kid. No, not tonight.
So anyway,
Sorry.
have you seen The Breakfast Club, Giff?
I've seen The Breakfast Club many, many times.
Yes,
Yes.
we all have, and it's great. So we'll get our fresh spin here and see if it still holds up.
I think it will.
And we're going to
It
talk about
definitely
music too,
will.
and John Hughes movies. So we're going to have some good, fun extra lists because John Hughes directed it, and then there's a great soundtrack. So we're going to throw in those things as well next week.
God
Awesome.
bless him.
Love it.
All right. Hey, if you love our show, or even if you hate our show, go on to Twitter and Facebook and leave us a positive review, or follow us on Twitter and Facebook and leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform of choice. And
Do it ironically if you hate us.
Yeah, we'll take it. I don't care if you actually like the show or not. Just leave something nice.
You bring something nice to wear.
That's what I was just gonna say. Hey, how about we close it out with a little Preacher Row?
I love it.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
See you guys.
to free. No one's here to comfort me. Sorry for what I have done. Sorry that your son is gone. 7 steps and it will be my last. Hands tied, tell me on my plan. I turn and I look to you. I'm scared but there's nothing I can do.